Welcome to NFL Daily, where we're always feeling the urgency. I'm Gregg Rosenthal, and beyond excited to be joined today by Jane Slater of NFL Network. You will recognize her from the NFL Network polo she's always wearing this time of year up in Oxnard, but she's now back in the Dallas area. But you're not just a Dallas Cowboys reporter. You can talk NFL, Jane Slater. So we're going to do some news before we get to Cowboys talk.
Yeah, I'm just as excited about the football season as a lot of the fans are. I'm obviously following it very, very closely. And some of the things that have happened in the last couple of weeks, I don't know about you, Greg, but I am a huge fan of the Real Housewives franchise. They've got nothing on the reality that seems to be some of these storylines that have peaked in the last couple of weeks.
Well, I feel like they could do a Real Housewives, maybe like the Real Single Ladies of Dallas, and have Slater on. I almost feel like you've been trying out for that quietly for years. Like your life is a reality show.
It feels like it sometimes.
All right, so we're going to do some news, like I said, and then we're going to talk deep dive into the Cowboys. We'll try to talk some of the stuff on the field because we've hit the contract so hard, but I'm more interested in what this team's actually going to look like this season. And then we're going to wrap up the show with Pete Sweeney from Arrowhead Pride. So talking Cowboys, talking Chiefs today, but first we will do some news. Yeah, bummer, Jane, that we're starting with a quarterback injury that didn't see coming. Nick Shook and I spent the top of our show on Monday morning just so excited about how good J.J McCarthy looked, and he apparently hurt his knee in that game, came into the building Monday morning after not saying a word about it on Sunday, and he told them he had some knee soreness, and it turns out he needs surgery for a torn MCL. At this point, we are waiting to find out how or what kind of surgery he's going to get, whether it's going to be a full repair or if it's just going to be a trim. The full repair would potentially knock him out for the entire season. The trim would be 4 to 6 weeks. And I think we might have got a little bit of a hint from Kevin O'Connell of what's more likely in this situation when he spoke to the media on Tuesday.
What's best for the long-term health of J.J. McCarthy will be the priority. And I don't, like I said, have that answer and really won't be a part of determining that answer is the best thing I can tell you because I have total, complete trust in our medical staff and also, the people that will be, performing the procedure.
Yeah, Jane, when he starts that saying the long-term health of a player is going to be the priority, that makes me worried that we might not see J.J. McCarthy this entire season because that's going to be the best for him long-term.
And why would you, right, Greg? I mean, they went out and they got him with the number 10 overall pick. I mean, you lose Kirk Cousins to the Atlanta Falcons. Thankfully, they went out and got Sam Darnold, who, was a huge offseason acquisition. And, I think we all thought that J.J. McCarthy would take a little bit, obviously, to get onto the field. But why rush this first-round pick for you? I know that, you had mentioned it. They got to wait till they get in there. They do the surgery. Are they going to clip the meniscus? Is it going to sideline him for the full year? But why rush him back? I mean, if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, I'm protecting this pick. I'm protecting him in the sense that, when he's rested up, he can come be around the sidelines. But I don't know that I'm trying to push that out in the field. But I mean, I think probably the most disheartening part about it is, to your point, he came in on Monday and hadn't really had any issues with it. And then lo and behold, now the Minnesota Vikings fan base that was so excited about J.J. McCarthy and moving forward now has to wait and see, when they're going to actually see him on the field.
Yeah, you feel for McCarthy. First of all, you feel for Vikings fans because, the excitement level. You think about how well Kirk Cousins was playing before that injury. You think about the history of the quarterback position over the years in Minnesota and Teddy Bridgewater and just everyone else that they've tried over the last bit. Christian Ponder, Sam Bradford, and this kid. He looked so exciting to a 21 years old. You mentioned it. The doctors are going to make this decision ultimately. If they think it's, that they could just do the lighter surgery and he could come back, that would be exciting, but we will see. Something else that crossed my mind on this is just Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell are both up for extensions. That makes that decision a little trickier. And yet I feel like Sam Bradford has an awesome situation, as did J.J. McCarthy. It's a really good offensive line. It's a great receiver group, especially when TJ Hawkinson gets back. Flores coached up that defense pretty good. There's actually a narrative here, and I know the Sam Darnold hive is out, dancing on poor J.J McCarthy's injury here. They're excited to see their guy finally do something. I'm not as much, but I'm actually not ruling out this team from being very competitive, whether Sam Darnold's great or not. I think there's a lot of good things around him.
Well, and like I said, you just got to be happy that they went out there and they've got at least some depth as a result of these injuries. I mean, look, I'm certainly no stranger to covering injuries at the quarterback position here in Dallas, and sometimes there is a silver lining. And so, Sam Darnold, I don't think Sam Darnold excites a lot of Minnesota fans. I don't know if you know many. I actually do. This was devastating news to a lot of Vikings fans today. But I would just say, pump the brakes. At least you've got a vet that, at least knows his way around live action in the game. He looked good in the preseason. He's looked good at camp. And so you've got a viable option there. But certainly take sort of the air out of the room for fans that were, already losing Kirko, now having to deal with this situation. And then to bring up Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, God, it feels like this franchise has been snake bitten a little bit at times.
It has, and yet it is good to keep, this in perspective. He's a 21-year-old. He'll still get to be around the team throughout the course of the season, even if he is out. We'll see. We don't need to write that story. Maybe it'll all turn out better. What would turn out better for me with Brandon Ayuk is if this thing just ended. We got, no slight to our insiders, but we got kind of another non-update, and there was a little moving forward of the situation, which Ian Rappaport was first to report, our guy, the insider, saying that the Steelers have been wait and see mode, that they actually believe that a deal from their side has been agreed to in terms of trade terms, that Ayuk was also happy with their contract terms. But it's sort of in the 49ers / Ayuk's corner because the 49ers sent out a new offer to Ayuk. And I was trying to parse, what does this all mean? It almost felt like this was the 49ers saying, we've done everything we can do, and now it's up to Ayuk. That was my takeaway. I don't know if you had a takeaway on this.
Well, I think he's also got to ask himself, is this a better situation for him than what he's currently got with the 49ers? I mean, you've got Russell Wilson, which a big question mark with him, the Steelers. I think you feel good about Mike Tomlin. He's always got you in there. But to your point, the whole back and forth, the showing up at camp, how awkward that has to be. I was actually talking to Steve Weiss, who covers the 49ers quite a bit, and doing an interview with Nick Bosa recently, he talked about how hard it is when you're holding out. In this situation, a lot of holdout guys, they're not at the facility. They're not around things. Ayuk's been there. He's watching practice. He's just not an active participant. I would imagine it's uncomfortable for everyone. But I think that the storyline that I've at least been entertained by is there seems to be this kind of new culture of punking insiders. And the reason why there's always new information out there, Greg, is as somebody who covers a team that is always out there in the news. I mean, when I once covered the Rangers, there was a player that told his daughter that he was going to go play for the Cleveland Indians. And she told her preschool teacher, who told a local reporter that my dad's going to be an Indian. And that's how we knew that Murphy was moving on. And so these days, you never know who these players are talking to. A lot of times they love to give them to former teammates that are in the media. So that's why you've constantly got to stay on top of it. You've got to see every twist and turn when the story is still out there and developing. But I find it really, really interesting. Some of the aggregators, these blogger insiders versus the insiders these days. It's sort of the story within the story on my timeline.
Right. Well, let's be real. No one's covered themselves in glory with this story, and it's no one's fault. But you're not allowed to take credit. I've seen this one reporter, you're not allowed to take credit for saying you were right if he ends up going to the Steelers when you said the deal was done last Friday. It's not even done. I mean, I got a bone to pick even with some of the wording on these headlines. There's a headline, Niners, Steelers have deal agreed upon for what? Ayuk. I guess I get what they're saying, that that part of the deal is in place, but it's not agreed upon if he's not going there. It's not agreed upon if the 49ers haven't made the decision or Ayuk hasn't made the decision. Just let it end, and hopefully we don't have to retape this.
It's a little misleading, right?
Yes.
I always get frustrated with that too. I'm always until the deal is done, and we've seen the twists and turns. I mean, again, bringing it back to Dallas, Eric Kendricks, remember he was headed to the 49ers, and then at the last minute changed his mind and came to Dallas. And so to me, until the ink is dried, you got to be very, very careful about how you word these things. But personally, I'm like you, my Twitter timeline, at first, I don't know. I had to do some deep diving. I'm like, what am I missing with all of this? And it's fascinating. So if you have missed it, go do a deep dive on X, formerly Twitter. I just will never get used to comfortably saying X. But it is fascinating to watch this, and far more interesting than some of the trade talks that we've had around here.
It's fine. I'm never gonna stop calling it Twitter. I'm never gonna even mention or apologize for that. Elon Musk supposedly in that space that he had the other night called it Twitter himself. So even he calls it Twitter. Let's go to the other weird hanging holdout right now. There's a few. Jamar Chase quietly wasn't at Bengals practice today, by the way, for the first time, which is interesting. He's been holding in, and there's Trent Williams. But the one I wanted to just talk about quickly was Hassan Reddick, who requested a trade, and then the Jets immediately released a statement, we're not going to trade you. And it's just back to where it was, which is they won't consider giving him money unless he shows up. He won't consider showing up unless they give him money. And at some point, I do think it's fair to criticize Joe Douglas and this front office for even getting themselves into this mess.
I mean, I think going back to the Real Housewives analogy, the messiest Housewives season or franchise this year has been New Jersey. Like, we're talking, they couldn't even sit down at the final dinner together. They were pointing fingers. They were, there's been a lot of stuff that's been leaked to the media, and it feels very much like the Jets, who, right there, New Jersey. There's been a lot of leaks out of that building. I feel like some of the business has been really, really messy as it relates to players. Even your starting quarterback, there's been drama around him. And then when I was talking to a couple of GMs and agents, because I'm nosy, I'm just curious, what am I missing with this Hassan Reddick deal? Is it the player who's making $14.5 million right now, final year of your deal? You understand that you want some security and safety. It's always been my impression, Greg, that a lot of this stuff before you even trade, that you're trading for a pick. In this case, it was a third round conditional pick in 2026. But you also know you're going to have to pay the player what his market value is. And with the 50.5 sacks, like, he's looking at 25 to 28 million. You are under the impression that's already going to happen. So a lot of the GMs that I talked to and agents, I won't even say what some of them have said to me, but they absolutely are pointing the finger at the Jets. This should have been done.
Right, because other teams knew the situation with Reddick going into it. And yes, I know he did an opening press conference, but even in that press conference, he said he wanted to get paid. And I thought, assumed he was. I'm working on the top 50 free agents, by the way, of 2025. And yeah, Hassan Reddick, at least for now, is on that list. Couple other just quick items I'm going to run through, and then we're going to take a break and talk about the Cowboys. There was an article on ESPN that said teams have inquired about Matthew Judon, which to me just was a sign of, like, maybe it was Judon's camp trying to scare up some offers or just getting that out there. So that's interesting. He was at joint practice today, and one Patriots reporter said maybe he was motivated by it because he had his best practice of camp and supposedly was awesome going up against the Eagles. Amarius Mims, the left tackle for the Bengals, unfortunately, or right tackle, left tackle, they were trying him at both, but probably going to be the right tackle. Going to miss a couple weeks, so that's disappointing for him. They really wanted him to be ready for the season to protect him. And then Jalen Phillips, good news for the Dolphins, off the PUP list, and a bunch of injuries for the Lions, including Jahmyr Gibbs with a hamstring injury, which is something to watch. Anything strike you there? I'm a little worried that we're counting on an injured first-round pick and Trent Brown, who's just coming off the PUP and is very inconsistent, like, to protect Joe Burrow potentially in week 2 is that matchup, I think, against the Ravens.
Well, I thought Amarius Mims, when this was one of my probably, like, I don't know if I've ever heard an injury described this way, but extremely minor setback. That's got to make you feel right, like extremely minor setback. So good for Mims. And then the one that's standing out to me is the Giants and what they're going to do at the running back position. I mean, I realized that Tyrone Tracy wasn't going to be your starter, but you're already going into the season without Saquon Barkley. You need Daniel Jones to do less, not more. And so I would imagine handing the ball off is part of that. You've got Singletary there, Eric Gray. So it's going to be interesting to see how they sort of navigate through this thing just in terms of depth and how they run the ball up there.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Tyrone Tracy had an air cast put him on as he left practice. It does seem like they avoided the worst, though, and so we'll see how
was
long
the
he's
extreme-
out
was
for
that the
there.
extreme?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not going to be season ending. So that is good news there. All right, it's good news. We get to continue to talk to Jane, and we're going to talk about her favorite reality show on earth, the Dallas Cowboys, right after this break. We are back on NFL Daily. Yeah, one of the world's biggest Real Housewives fans, Jane Slater. I'm more of a Terrace House guy. Have you ever watched Terrace House? It's more peaceful. Like, not much happens. They're very nice to each other. The relationships move slowly. It's on Netflix. It's set in Japan. It's great.
I'll have to tune that in. I'm always looking for Netflix suggestions. Octopus Murders is another great one if you're looking for one. A lot of conspiracy theories.
I'm very, that is very you. You and Mark love to bond over conspiracy
I love
theories.
reaching out to Mark Sessler over our conspiracy theories.
Yeah, no, and I'm like 3 years behind the zeitgeist. Everyone was into Terrace House during the pandemic, and I'm catching up to it late. But there's like 50 episodes per season, so it'll take your mind off things if you're looking for mindless entertainment. The Cowboys, they're great at mindless entertainment. They've been doing it forever. I was at a used bookstore a couple weeks ago, and I saw that Skip Bayless book where about the Cowboys, where Troy Aikman. Yeah, the book starts with him telling Skip Bayless, "I'm not gay," which was like this rumor back then, and then absolutely ripping his coach after they won the Super Bowl to shreds in print. They don't do it like that anymore, Jane. This team has been drama forever.
Oh, and there's so much drama that I don't even report. That's the craziest part about it. It's too TMZ. It's too tawdry. The whole Skip Bayless, Troy Aikman thing is so fascinating about the backstory on that, working in Dallas, as to who Skip Bayless's source was and how he decided the source. It was like a game of phone.
It was Switzer's camp. It was Switzer's camp, at least according to this. You could tell it was Switzer's camp versus Troy's camp, and they were putting all this stuff out there. And to be fair to Skip Bayless, he never said that Troy Aikman was gay, but Troy Aikman knew that people were saying that about him, and he wanted to set the record straight.
See,
and he did it while burying his head coach after they won the Super Bowl on the record, saying, "I don't even know what that guy does here." And he was still the coach. That's great.
Well, and I've always appreciated, like, Troy suffers no fools. I've done a couple of events with him, and I will tell you this: I show up ready to work when it's Troy Aikman. Like, I know the material. I'm on time, but I'm like on Lombardi's time when it's Troy Aikman. And so and if you talk to some of his former teammates, they'll tell you there was a little bit of a disconnect during his time in Dallas because he, required so much of others. But in his defense, he was used to the way that Jimmy coached, and Barry was just completely different. I mean, he was like the fun stepdad.
Yeah, I got a better sense, and I started this book. I thought that'd be interesting. I read another Bayless book, and yeah, you get a different view of Aikman. He seemed like a complicated guy, but not kind of who you think. Not a life of the party guy. A very serious guy who's always thinking about everything over and over and over. Not too smart for his own good, because I think that intelligence got him to where he is, and very different, I think, than the current Dallas Cowboys head coach. Quarterback Dak Prescott.
Absolutely.
In his situation. Not as much drama there. I wanted to get off the Dak contract and the CD contract, because we'll talk about that on this show.
It's exhausting,
yeah.
Greg.
It's fine. It'll get done, or it won't. I actually don't think the Dak thing will, but we'll talk about that plenty. Let's talk about what's on the field, because to me, this team is fascinating. They've been so good the last couple of years. It's the only division in the NFC to me where it's really a two-team race. So you start the year already kind of knowing, all right, you got either a 50% chance here to make the playoffs. That's great. You're going to have a bunch of games against Washington and the Giants. That's great. You have a game against Carolina in the NFC South. But it's a stars and scrubs type of team where there's really great players, and then there's some questionable spots. So I'm going to start this way, Jane. I'm going to give you problem areas as I see it for this team, and you can choose what you think the biggest concern is, and just go from there. I'll give you four options, it's telling there's four options. Wide receiver depth. Let's assume CD gets back, but basically beyond CD. The running back position, I'm going to call it defensive line bulk, like defensive tackle, edge, that type of thing. Not Parsons, but stopping the run, or the offensive line. Those are all issues I think could come up. What would you be most worried about and close to that?
With wide receiver, I think that they're good in the sense that they've got Brandon Cooks there, right? People seemingly keep forgetting about Brandon Cooks. And when they opened this offense up last year, if you guys will remember, there was so much discussion about Dak Prescott and the interceptions leading into last season. And then I think he had I think he only had 11, versus 22. Don't quote me on that. One of the reasons why they were doing it felt like dink and dunk to start the season was he almost felt like the coaching staff didn't trust Dak with the ball security, or maybe they were trying to build up his confidence. I don't know. But we found ourselves multiple times during the game go throw the ball to Brandon Cooks. If CeeDee Lamb is getting double teamed, get the ball to Brandon Cooks, and good things happened. And so people forget about him, but obviously you've got Brandon Cooks here. Jalen Tolbert and Jalen Brooks, the two Jalens, have really sort of stepped up. And Jalen Tolbert's an interesting story because they went out and got Jalen Tolbert in the draft 2 years ago. They'll tell you that maybe they put a little bit too much on his plate in that first year, and maybe some of the terminology and the schemes, they weren't clicking with him. But he and Dak have worked together a lot this offseason. Dak took, I think it was 11 guys to the Nike facility in Portland. CeeDee, interestingly enough, was not there. But those guys were all there, and he's just been getting a ton of reps. And I think Jalen Tolbert is going to be interesting for them to step up in that role that they wanted Michael Gallup to, but didn't. Of course, Michael left and then announced his retirement this offseason. So I think wide receiver, I'm good with. I'm going down the list here. Running back, I just don't know. I want to believe that Zeke's going to, even though they keep saying it's going to be a running back by committee, anytime Dallas is done by committee, it's never really worked for them. Now, it's worked when you've got a bruiser running back, like you had Zeke, and then you had a change of back guy, a little bit of a joystick in Tony Pollard. Now, Tony Pollard didn't do so well in Dallas, I think, because you didn't have that bruiser type of back. You were having issues with your offensive line. And a lot of people, this was underreported last year, but the running backs coach was new to the position and stepped away from the facility for personal reasons. I think it was quite a few games last year. And I know for a fact that was an issue for some of the running backs that were looking for some direction. They had Skip Pete there before, who had been 2 stops in Dallas, LA Rams, played the position. This coach hadn't even played the position. Now, I don't want to take that away. That's like someone saying, well, you didn't play the game of football, Jane, so you can't cover it. I get that. But I do believe that there was some issues with the running game last year as a result of all that. So I think bringing Zeke in is big because he's always been known to have a high football IQ. Sometimes not the best off the field IQ. That's gotten better.
I mean, I don't want him in there to be my running back coach, though. If he's the third guy, I kind of think at running back they might not have they could have a week 1 starter that's not even on their roster. I look at Denver and Miami, both got a lot of running backs, and I could see someone coming in.
I don't see Malik Davis, or I guess Rico Dowdle has shown you some flashes, and then you've got Deuce Vaughn, but I think what I'm more interested with Deuce Vaughn is they were working him in the slot, more of that receiver role like Cole Beasley. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. That's another one. Even when I was talking to you about wide receivers, they've also got Kevontae Turpin. So you got 2 small, really fast guys that you can, throw in the slot. And I think that could get real interesting for Dallas. And then we've even seen Micah Parsons finally getting some snaps at running back. He's been pounding the table for that for years. So I think offensively, Schottenheimer.
Wait, say that again. Getting snaps at running back. Why? Why are we spending time giving Micah Parsons snaps at running back? Is that a real thing that could happen, or is that just because he's Micah Parsons and they want to make him happy in practice?
I think it's more like goal line situations, right? I think they use him in sort of more of a fullback role. I don't think it's the smartest, especially with him coming up on a contract year, but Micah loves to eat, and I know that he wants it. And I think a lot of people probably would have laughed at him if it wasn't for Dan Quinn when he came to him and said, I want to play, I want to rush off the edge. I want to be a defensive end. They're like, no, we drafted you as a linebacker. And so, yeah, I think they could get creative in certain situations. And so I think, they came up with this Texas Coast offense last year. It took a little time for them to get it going. A lot of times the terminology they were using wasn't meshing up with a West Coast offense. And I think it's sort of found its rhythm. So I'm not as worried about that. The offensive line is still something I'm another injury. You had Chuma Adoga get injured in the preseason game. I think we really like what we saw from Tyler Guyton. That guy was bullying dudes out of the stadium the other night.
Yeah, that's their first round pick, who's now going to be their starter. You mentioned Adoga is probably out for a month or something like that.
Yeah, and Tyler Guyton, what was so impressive about him is I talked to his offensive line coach, Duke Manyweather, and he told me it was Thursday he got drafted, and on Saturday he decided to stay in Frisco, forego his summer, and worked out with Duke Manyweather 5, sometimes 6 days a week. And I think you're seeing some of that on the field. What's going to be interesting to watch is what are they going to do with the center position? Like, I thought Brock Hoffman was their guy, and now I'm hearing they're splitting some reps there. I mean, I think they like what they're seeing from Cooper Beebe, the rookie that they got. So I think the offensive line, I think they're still trying to find like their best starting 5. So that's kind of an area. And if you don't have Chuma, you've got TJ Bass, you got a couple of these other guys, but offensive depth was a problem last year. So
yeah,
maybe they don't quite have that figured out. Defensive line, I think Marshawn Nealon has done a nice job stepping in for Sam Williams. So a lot of these rookies are getting asked to do a lot. I think the area I think that I'm probably most excited about right now is linebackers. I mean, this is something Mike Zimmer is so good at. He's got a very specific vision for what he wants to do there. You've got Eric Kendricks wearing the green dot, and you've got these young guys that are really, really stepping up, not just your corners, but some of your safeties that we saw really getting after the ball in the preseason. It was even some of the players talking after the game. You know, Dan Quinn coached up in the booth, and they said Mike Zimmer at times wasn't even looking at his call sheet. It was just sort of instinctive. So they're just getting this wealth of information with Mike Zimmer, and who is very, very different from Dan Quinn. He admitted to me at camp that he's had to work on developing relationships with players, like very old school in the sense it's like separation of church and state. But it seems like the guys, at least one guy put it after the game. He said, this defense feels like it's going to work. So I think that's an area, you know, maybe to get excited about.
Yes, I think that I had a list of like things, you know, to spin it positive that you'd be excited about, and you know, Jake Ferguson being like a real deal tight end, and Tolbert you mentioned having a big camp, but Zimmer is kind of it. He's got a lot to work with, a lot of talent in the secondary. People kind of forget Trayvon Diggs is coming back. Deron Bland off that great season. Jordan Lewis is a good player. You have a lot of safeties. They were so bad at linebacker, and Zimmer's good at coaching up. I'm not sure if I'm buying your Eric Kendricks pop, just because he hasn't been, you know, he's been an issue for his last couple of teams, so it's hard to ignore that. And even Brandon Cooks, I'm like a little worried about the older guys, but if they can have the young guys come up, then they'll be fine. To answer my own question, I'm with you. I would probably be most concerned about the O-line, because that's what this team used to be all about. And if you don't have great talent in the backfield, you kind of need that to make up for it. But you mentioned Parsons playing running back. I actually have a quote from him today, which is just crazy. Mike McCarthy questioned his reads. I think he was kind of joking around, and Parsons was joking back, and he said, has Mike ever played running back in his life? Someone who has never played the position can't question somebody's reads. You just got to let me be a football player.
I'll tell you this, great. Covering Micah.
He's a little crazy, Micah Parsons, just based off seeing him on his YouTube with CJ Stroud, and they taped this thing where they went to Japan. I watched a little bit, Micah Parsons is a little different.
He's a different cat. And honestly, look, I'll be honest, some of the stuff you heard last year that came out and people were bashing some of the reporters, I heard the same stuff. I mean, he can rub some of his teammates the wrong way, and then, wanting to be a leader and not showing up for, and again, it was voluntary, and he made a point of bringing that up, but saying things this was on the record. I mean, he said this to me and Calvin Watkins when we were standing at his locker during OTAs. He said, they don't pay me enough to be here. And I'm like, they pay you enough, your rookie contract. And by the way, you're looking to get your next deal. And so I was a little shocked by that, but I also appreciated that Micah will put his name to it. Some of these guys will float it out there, unnamed sources. He says everything with his chest. And it reminds me so much of, when I watched football back in the 90s, guys said it with their chest. And I think a lot of guys have gotten a little bit more savvy over the years, but I can't knock him for it. I mean, there was a couple of years ago, I think not to get too political, but it was during, the Black Lives Matters, and it was police. And he went on there and had something to say about, a police officer. And I remember saying something to him, it's your rookie year. You might want to be careful. He literally, once again, was like, nope, this is how I feel about things. And so the way he talks in the media is the way he talks to his coaches. And I thought it was really interesting before we even got to camp. he said, him and Mike Zimmer had very limited interaction because he hadn't been there. And he said, Mike's going to want to do things his way. I'm going to want to do things my way. And he goes, we're going to have a compromising relationship. And I think what he meant is like, it's going to be a relationship of compromise. But I'm like, it is going to be compromised if you don't fall in line with Mike. But I did learn from him at camp that him and Mike are now doing morning breakfasts, which is what he and Dan Quinn used to do. And Micah started bringing Trayvon Diggs in. And so what I've learned with Micah is and I've been described this way from a mentor. They're like, you're a golden retriever, Jane. Like you constantly need a pat on your head. It says you've done a good job. Like you, like your Tinkerbell, you like die without applause. That's Micah. And so I think as long as you understand the psychology of Micah, and I've learned this new coaching staff has tried to really tap into that, like going to his training camps this off season and getting to know him. I think that you can have a very good relationship as long as you can tap into that psychology and that mentality of understanding what makes Micah tick.
Yeah, and you can get away with annoying your teammates a little bit or taking stances or talking like that when you're one of the greatest defensive players I've ever seen enter the league. That's the thing is like, I think people get it twisted a little bit. I wouldn't say he's underrated, but I've been doing this since 2004. And the list of defensive players that have entered the league that have put up the first 3 years that Micah Parsons has put up is probably a list of like J.J. Watt, certainly. Darrelle Revis, not quite as fast to start, but basically. And that's the area. Aaron Donald, he was a little slower out the gates, a little slower, but Aaron Donald certainly. It's like those are the types of players we're talking about. And so when you're that good, you can get away with it. I'm fascinated by it.
You also have to ask Gregg,
yeah,
bringing up a point. I'm like, you also have to ask yourself, like, if I'm Micah Parsons, why do I want to continue to put some of these unnecessary treads on my tires, right? Like when we talk about the running back position, like even if it's a goal line stand or mixing it up or, like playing out of position, like I guess you could argue what is his more natural position these days. But I felt like at times, and this is not just my observation, he would sort of disappear at the end of the seasons. And that was some of a knock that he was getting internally in the building is like, where are you going? I think he was sometimes getting worn out at that position. And so what's going to be intriguing to me is how does Mike manage it? It's almost like a child that's like hyperactive, right? Like you love the energy, you want to support that, but you also don't want them to burn out, like about whatever their passion is. And I don't know if that's a thing for Micah, but sometimes I just wonder if you're trying to do too much. It's like, what is it? Like jack of all trades, master of none. Like if you truly want to be great at something, should he be dispersing so much energy? I mean, we've seen him line up at safety at times.
He's been at off-ball linebacker. That seems like it's really going to be a thing this year.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting to go this deep on Parsons, but I find him fascinating and the way they're possibly using him. That's another story that I think is going to get a lot of attention once people see it in the regular season, that they really are planning to use him as an off-ball linebacker again, which I thought was in the past. And I'm not necessarily saying it's the wrong thing to do. I want to see it first, but that could be, I don't know if that's adding pounding, like we'll see. I kind of trust Mike Zimmer to use him creatively, but that's a sea change from really where he's been the last couple of years, which is to me, the best pure just edge rusher in the NFL.
Well, and I think the other thing is last year we saw that there were other guys that can get to the quarterback. The one area that they really, really struggled with last year, and they seem to do in the NFC just in general, is stopping the run. And so I think that's been the biggest challenge for Mike Zimmer is like, what is my best lineup, my best mix of players on defense that's going to help us stop the run? Because that has truly been an Achilles heel. And when you look right now with the Eagles getting Saquon Barkley, I mean, I don't think you have too much to worry about with the Giants. I mean, knock on wood, I just don't feel like they've got a lot of depth there. Washington, but again, it's the 49ers every year. I mean, Christian McCaffrey, like, how are you going to slow him down?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look around the league and some of the games that really tripped the Cowboys up, it was that is an area, and they'll tell you that, like, that's an area they have to shore up. And so I'm just wondering if they're trying to figure out ways that you could better utilize Micah. Like if you've got other guys getting to the quarterback, can he help you stop the run better?
Yeah. And you mentioned Marshawn Nealon. That was their I believe, second round pick. He looks like he's probably going to start at edge, and they drafted him to help stop the run. I'm going to leave you with this. And I know this is tricky. You are the NFL Network reporter covering the Cowboys, but I have you in this role as an analyst. They won't hear this. You mentioned the 49ers. They play the 49ers in San Francisco. There's a couple primetime games. I think that's week 8. They have a couple tricky primetime games. They also have a Monday Night Football game against the Texans, who I know Jerry would hate to lose to in a big spot.
The Texas Bowl.
Yeah, sneaky rivalry. Their schedule's actually quite easy down the stretch. That's where they have a lot of those Giants and Commanders and Panthers game. But before that, it's pretty challenging. And so if in either of those games they come out of it like 500 or worse, like the season is not going well, and you lose in a big spot to the 49ers, or you lose in a big spot, this is, I think, week 11 to the Texans. Mike McCarthy obviously brought back this year, but uncertain about, his contractual future. Like, what are the odds that something could happen here with Mike McCarthy, do you think, if things aren't going well during the season?
I'm trying to think the only time they made a switch, mid-season would have been, it would have been Jason Garrett taking over for, was it Campo?
I think so, but
or was it? No, it was, what's his face?
Wade Phillips?
Wade Phillips.
Yeah.
That was the only time they made a switch mid-season. And I know Jerry's not like a huge fan of that. So even when Mike Nolan and that defense was really, really struggling Mike McCarthy's year, the reason why I was told the Cowboys got so mad at me for putting that report out was that they were considering making a switch to George Edwards. And then ultimately they didn't. That was the only time they've actually even gotten rid of a coach after 1 year. I think Jerry will play it out regardless. I don't see them making that kind of switch. They know what they're getting out of Mike Zimmer, right? You've seen him as a head coach. You've seen him as your defensive coordinator. I would be shocked if they did that.
Okay, that's fair. And it's an easy, like I said, the end of the schedule.
But I think it's fair to say that
easy.
Mike McCarthy in his final year of his contract, you continue to lose to the 49ers, especially with, how they've overcome. I still think a lot of people want to, knock Mike McCarthy. I still argue that despite injuries and some of the setbacks over the years, you still got 2 13-win seasons and you've made it to the playoffs. It's just how they lose in the playoffs that you find yourself going, well, how much longer are we going to waste some of the talent on this roster? And you're already seeing some of the roosters coming home that you've got to figure out to pay because they're getting long in the tooth. And so,
right.
God, I'm sounding like Jerry Jones there with some of my, my isms there, but yeah, I truly think that Mike's going to have to get one from the 49ers here. And it's just, man, he has just not done well against them or the Packers for that matter. Remember his first game back was with the Packers and then collapses to the Packers and young Jordan Love to go home this year.
Yeah, they just need someone else to take out the 49ers for them. But that's I just looked at that schedule. I was like, oh, these primetime games are in very interesting spots. It's a fascinating season. I know, fans who think the Cowboys get a little too much shine on ESPN and NFL Network. Like, this isn't a good season for you because McCarthy in the final year of his contract, Dak in the final year of his contract, like, it's a real thing. Dak might be the most highly sought after free agent quarterback ever in a year from now. I wouldn't bet against it. I also wouldn't bet against Jane Slater, leading the reporters in coverage as she's covering all this from around the Texas area, and I know they have you on other teams too. It was a pleasure, Jane,
Always a pleasure.
Having you on NFL Daily. We will have to do it again. Welcome back to NFL Daily. Very excited to welcome my next guest. He does a great job over there at Arrowhead Pride. It is Pete Sweeney, one of the best Chiefs reporters, writers, analysts in the business. And yeah, he's coming to us live from Chiefs training camp. Welcome, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Loved the old show, for a long time. Excited about the new show. I like that you're your every day now, right? I'm sure the workload is interesting, but I've enjoyed it coming back and forth from St. Joe, about an hour north of Kansas City. So I've been making that commute.
Ooh, yeah, that's tricky. Yeah, daily, it's different, but you know what? It gives us a little extra breathing room some days to dive into teams I feel like have been underserved on the podcast. And it's crazy, but I kind of think the Chiefs have not been talked about that much. I don't know if it's just nationally, whether we're sick of them, or it's just like, okay, here they come again. I remember this as a Patriots fan. There was certainly fatigue in certain years. And yeah, I feel like the Chiefs, they're always different. And yet this is a year they're kind of slipping under the radar a little bit. So I wanted to talk to you. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you, because you have the privilege to just like watch Patrick Mahomes every day of his career, which is just crazy, especially in this training camp setting. Like, what's different? Like, what do you see about Patrick Mahomes 2024, maybe that you haven't seen before?
Yeah, I mean, it's wild, covering him now since 2018, how normal some plays you see at practice have become in an odd way. I mean, I started in 14, so I got to cover Alex Smith, and it obviously was very different. But now you go to practice and you see him curl a sidearm around a tackle, and it isn't something that you're like, whoa, what a play! Like, it almost is like a normal thing. But that's just a product of the situation, and one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen. And one of the things that you try to always ask, especially with this coaching staff, is how do you coach that? Like, how do you challenge him to get better? And it's funny. We had a chance to talk to offensive coordinator Matt Nagy today, and I remember earlier in the offseason, you ask, what is he working on this year? And it's always for him a little bit of the footwork, staying in structure, because I think he always has that natural tendency to get out of structure. One of the points for him this year was depth of drop back, right? And especially when now you're dealing with a rookie left tackle, that's going to be more important, especially at the beginning of the season now than ever, in a sense. And so it's something where it is interesting because, I think a lot of us realize, and where you are and across the nation and, in Kansas City, quite obviously, like, this is one of the greatest athletes of all time. But what makes him consistently great is he is always trying to ask these coaches what he can work on. And so that's been a point of emphasis for him. A little bit tougher to see that aspect when you're going against your own team and it's a practice kind of designed for you. And so we'll learn, more of that, I think, as the season goes along. But even still, like, even if he's bad at that, I mean, you're still probably looking at like 3 touchdowns and 280 yards in a bad game. And so it's crazy. It's become the norm. And I think he looks for anything to be motivated by. It's something where I can't believe the Raiders did the thing with the puppet that ended up going
that
viral.
was a fan. He was set up to fail. A fan brought him in and he gave him the puppet,
Like the NFL Top 100 with, a lot of people respect Pat now as like the best in the game, but you can tell that he's always like, when he's asked about these things, he's checking them because it's any motivation for him.
Yeah. So you've watched this offense evolve. It really changes year by year. This is a team that tends to address things in all at once in bulk, whether it's the offensive line or at one point their pass rush. And now, the emphasis this offseason's been apparently on the deep ball. Like it's been there at practice. It certainly was there with the personnel acquisitions. We know Marquise Hollywood Brown might not be ready for week 1, but have you seen difference in how the offense is running things in practice?
Well, what has been interesting about that is, the grand story of the Chiefs coming into the preseason and training camp was this idea that they were going to throw the ball down the field more, and asking Andy Reid, like, what are you guys working on that's different? And his point was, when they're not working on the Ravens, which you can tell they are sometimes doing that, especially, when they have the defense out there and the quarterback is scrambling and not throwing as much. But, when they are working on the offense, Andy Reid has kind of said, we have similar stuff that we've always had, but now Mahomes is seeing that his targets are getting separation. And I think stemming from that, we're seeing them throw the ball down the field more. There certainly has been an emphasis on the 11 personnel with the 3 wide receivers before Brown got hurt. And that's what's the new buzz story right now in Kansas City, is just this idea that it was going to be so exciting and you saw it in the preseason game where by design it was going to be Rice and Brown and Worthy. And now, you're taking a back seat to that. Like in practice today with Brown out of the mix, it was Justin Watson. We saw in the game that it was Sky Moore. These are fine players, but not the speed that we were looking for the Chiefs to lean back into like they were more so like in the 2018 season. And so I think it's trying to make sure you have two really tough opponents to start the year, get by, grit out those wins without this speed, this return to the quote unquote Legion of Zoom that they were looking for. And then maybe you see that with the timeline in week 3, week 4.
Oh, I hadn't heard Legion of Zoom yet. Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's the thing. When Hollywood Brown is back out there, if they are healthy, the closer we get to the season, the less I'm expecting a Rashee Rice suspension. I just think if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. And this group ranks like with any weapons group that he's had. If you're getting a good year out of Kelsey and that 3 receiver group, that is more than enough weapons. I feel like there's almost not any tangible reasons. There's not many to not believe in the Chiefs. But if I was looking for intangible reasons, and I think intangibles matter because, I mean, they kind of won the Super Bowl on some level off intangibles. They weren't the best team in the NFL last year. They certainly weren't the best offense in the NFL and not the best offense Mahomes has had. And yet they went through one of the toughest gauntlets any playoff team has literally ever had. So that was intangibles. And so the intangibles I look to, and tell me which one you think is a bigger concern to you. Number one would just be the three-peat, like the weight of it all. There's a reason why it's never happened before, and teams usually haven't even gotten that close. Or just the defense regressing a little to the mean. As great as Steve Spagnuolo is, and they're always peaking late, their year-end rankings and efficiency haven't been outstanding every year. Last year was the year that kind of came out of nowhere, and the personnel looks good. But which would you be more worried about? Kind of just the weight of it all, the three-peat, and not having fun maybe doing that, or the defense maybe coming back to earth?
Yeah, I think I would say the latter more so than the former. The defense. The defense was so damn good last year. I mean, it really was. And now you have an injury to Charles Menahue, who was a big part of that, especially when he was able to get back from suspension and compile all those sacks. Has the ACL in the AFC title, and I think he's going to be a big player that the Chiefs are missing. You trade away L'Jarius Sneed. I think we all knew it was you either got to keep L'Jarius Sneed or Chris Jones. You're going to have to make that choice, paying Chris Jones, and you understand why. You say it all the time, like there's not as many dominant defensive tackles in the NFL. That's such a luxury to have, and I think the Chiefs realize that, and they've been very good at drafting corners. Certainly in the first round with first-team All-Pro Trent McDuffie, but even on the day 3 picks, like Sneed was a day 3 pick. They just got this kid, Jaden Hicks, who has looked really good in training camp. But I think when you think about replacing L'Jarius Sneed, who was very, very, very good, and you look at these younger players, this has been an underrated storyline that not a lot of people would realize. They've been looking for, when Sneed was here, a third cornerback to step up for a while now. It's between these two, again, day 3 guys, Joshua Williams and Jalen Watson. And over the years, like no one has really been able to claim it. It's been more of a rotation thing. Dave Merritt, the defensive backs coach, has been forward and saying, like, we've been waiting for one of these guys to step up. Now Sneed's gone, right? So now you have to have one of these guys step up. Trent McDuffie, it seems like he's all world, slam dunk first round pick. But which of these guys is going to do it? And I tend to think they are not confident in either one of those guys. I actually think they're most confident in 7th rounder Najee Johnson, but he's had trouble staying on the field. Last year, he was going to trump both Williams and Watson for that final cornerback position. And it was a rainy day here in St. Joe. The Chiefs had to go indoor on the turf, the enemy of all football players. And Najee Johnson tears his ACL, and he's out of the mix. He misses the entire season. When he's been out here, and he had a little bit of a hamstring issue a couple weeks ago, he's been very, very good. And it's tough to be good in this camp because we know about the prolific offense. And so when he's staying with these receivers who are some of the better, speedier receivers in the NFL, you're seeing, okay, maybe they're going to be okay without a L'Jarius Sneed, but it's been tough for him to stay on the field. And I just want to make a comment about the former and the motivation thing. I think you're right. And again, I know this is a podcast that all NFL fans listen to, so I'll keep the Mahomes love at a minimum. But man, like 10 minutes after they won the Super Bowl, he was on the stage with Chris Jones. He was mic'd up because NFL Films does such a good job with that stuff. And the first thing he says is, "I want the three-peat, dog." This was no joke, less than 15 minutes after they'd won it. And so I just think he's trying to make sure that everyone is motivated and knows, like, this is a real shot at history. Not to say that you just throw away the fatigue and all that, but I think when you have him as the leader, that's why I would say, if there's any questions, it's like the defense certainly taking a step back from, I believe they were number 2.
Yeah, I like that they've embraced it, that they haven't been like the Patriots who are like, we're not defending everything, everything's starting over, because it's just going to be so hard. And you hear it at the end. You hear it at the end of the Nuggets, defense of their championship this year. Just like, yeah, we didn't tell y'all, like, but man, that weighed on us week after. And I've seen it with the Patriots. We've seen it in NFL history with the Cowboys back in the day, certainly the 49ers. And it's different. And can you get the buy-in and everyone to just want it that bad? If any team could do it, like, this is it. Because, yeah, I tried to come up with, like, what's the thing that's going to get in their way the most? And, yeah, the cornerback battle is interesting. And yet, the two of those guys have been playing significant snaps in the Super Bowl. Yeah. And, they've won the Super Bowl off their defense last year, certainly off their offense the year before. They have a new, left tackle. We don't need to go into it too much. He's a second-round pick, though, Kingsley Suamataia. So that, that's a question mark, but that's one offensive lineman out of 5, and the other 4 are good. And I like the pass rush. Like, I love this linebacker group with Drew Tranquill and Nick Bolton and Leo Chanel. Like, the roster is about as good, I think, on balance as it's been in the Chiefs era. So, like, I'm not even going to go logical in terms of, like, things that would get in the way. I want you to tell me something you've been excited about. What's something that you're there every single day? You're driving an hour, that they're old school. They're still, like, you're doing this from what college is it exactly? Like,
Missouri Western State University.
Yeah.
This was a funny anecdote. Like, early on in camp, Travis Kelce was brought to the podium, and one of the things that he said really struck me, because I've been covering him about the same time. He's like, "Yeah, this is year 12 for me. That means I've spent an entire year in a college dorm in my 20s and 30s." So Andy Reid loves it. And you know what? It's hard to argue with 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. And, like, I think what he really likes about it more than anything is, like, the players eat right downstairs, all their meals, all 3 meals. That you hang out. There's no distractions for the older guys who might have kids at home, where you're able to focus on football. And I think they leave a little bit closer. And I know that it's becoming less and less popular, but Andy Reid seems to believe in it.
Yeah, and they have longer practices in generals. They've always been a hard practicing team, and it's working now. What's something there? Carson Steele is this. Yeah. He's fullback who got noticed, but nationally over the first preseason week for some great runs. It sounds like he's going to make that team. Xavier Worthy's obviously had a good first training camp. Sounds like he's stepped right into that role. Maybe just something that you've been there day to day that's surprised you, impressed you the most.
In recent days, Carson Steele, undrafted free agent at a UCLA, has really, I think, been the greatest riser of training camp. I just got out of practice a couple hours ago, and in this particular look, he was taking all of the second snaps after Isaiah Pacheco. We had seen that from Darren Eric Prince earlier on in training camp, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been in and out with illness. It's kind of a serious matter. He revealed that he's been dealing with some PTSD stemming from a situation in college, and you wish him the best, but the reality is, on the football field, it's opened the door for other guys to get more opportunities. So then Eric Prince is trying to win a position. You can tell he's gotten a little bit better in pass protection. But Carson Steele, I think he really wasn't going to make the team. When he entered camp, I thought practice squad was probably his best hope. He was able to capture the attention. You watch all the preseason games, you saw that play where he was bouncing off the defenders, and Andy Reid really likes him as a runner. And what I'm starting to think is, now that he's starting to get these second reps, is, maybe like a spellback / fullback, could it open up the door for the Chiefs to keep 3 running backs? Like, I sat here today and I did another 53. And one of the things I wrote was, I'm more sure right now that Carson Steele is going to make the roster than I am Prince or Clyde. Like, I think I think they'll keep Pacheco, obviously. I think Steele will be on the roster. Do they need both Prince and Clyde if you're keeping those guys? And they have 7 receivers they can keep. They're probably thinking about 9 or 10 offensive linemen. And so, roster construction, you got to make these tough decisions. I just think Steele has been such a surprise out of the woodwork, and he's a really, likable guy. Andy Reid seems to really love him. And now it's a matter of how does that impact the final 53? And it's going to be an interesting August 27th. That's
wild. Like Carson Steele could be getting drafted in your deeper fantasy leagues. Like, listen to this, man. That's awesome. This team is crazy. I'd love to see some new blood, but I also would love to see, I still just know that the Chiefs are going to be there at the end, and the NFL is better when the best player that I've ever seen is there at the end, and it's going to take like a great effort to knock this team off. And yeah, the season starts tough with the Ravens and the Bengals, but overall, this is one of the softest divisions in the NFL, other than the Chiefs, especially if Justin Herbert doesn't get healthy. So I feel like
that's what Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes can agree on, right? They were able to have these divisions where you're looking at 5-6 wins off the bat, until these guys get quarterbacks,
See, I always push back though, because everyone's like, and I was like, you know what? They had a better winning percentage out of the division in that whole run than ever in it. Like it really, they just like the Chiefs, they beat everyone.
Or Rex Ryan, he had his year.
Yeah, Rex had his moments. The Dolphins always gave Belichick trouble, no matter who was the coach for whatever reason. Appreciate you, Pete. We're gonna fly up, by the way, a graphic. We're wrapping up this show, but we just hit 2 more teams: Cowboys and the Chiefs. And we're trying to do a deep dive on every team. We're getting through them. We've highlighted them, and we are now through 8 teams. And so we did the Chiefs and the Cowboys today, and we will still keep cranking. Tell us who you want to hear from, except for your own team. Everyone always wants to hear about their own team. I appreciate you, Pete, and we'll hopefully talk to you again down the line. Check out his coverage, the great daily recaps that you have on Twitter, but obviously everything at Arrowhead Nation podcast, everything is going on. We will be back. I'm really excited about Thursday's show. Colleen Wolfe back in the studio. Patrick Claybon also there. That's going to be a fun one. Until next time on NFL Daily.